Welcome back to Mad in Love, where we engage in meaningful conversations about relationships and healing. I'm Dr. David Hawkins, your host, and today we have a very special guest with us, Sheila Gregoire, author of The Great Sex Rescue. Wow. Are we really going to talk about this? Yes, we are. Who joins us to challenge harmful evangelical teachings about sex and marriage. I take a deep breath. Sheila's mission to change the conversation about sex within the church aligns perfectly with our values here at Mad in Love. Sheila, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited about this conversation.
All right. Well, tell us about you and your personal journey that led to the book that we can see in the background there. And
Yeah.
tell us about you.
Okay, well, I'll try to do the short version, okay? I have a bunch of postgraduate degrees that I got: sociology, public admin, research, and then I didn't work because I was staying home with my kids. I wanted something to do, so I started blogging, and I was blogging about marriage and relationships for about 10 years. The more I talked about sex, the more my traffic grew. So I kind of became this weird Christian sex space, which is seriously strange. Nobody grows up thinking, you know what I want to do when I grow up? I want
Talk
to be
about
the
your mom and dad are probably going,
yeah.
no, wait, what happened here?
Yeah, exactly. But I found, I was putting out a lot of healthy information on how libido works, how arousal works, and the women coming to my blog still had a lot of the same issues. And they just couldn't get that breakthrough, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then one Friday afternoon, I had a migraine and I didn't want to work. So I was on Twitter procrastinating, and people were having a debate as to whether women needed love or respect. And they were referring to a best-selling book by Emerson Eggers called Love and Respect. And I thought,
Yeah.
I have that book and I've never read it. This is a great way to procrastinate. So I got the book and I turned to the sex chapter because that's just what I do. And I read, to my horror, if your husband is typical, he has a need that you don't have. And the need is for physical release. So nothing about intimacy. And if he doesn't get physical release, he'll have an affair. And I thought, if that...
and you took the book and you threw it, and then you went and picked it up again, and then you threw it again. I don't know what you did. I don't keep going.
Yeah, so I said to my team, like, we've got to do something about this. If this is what's being taught, no wonder people are still having issues. It doesn't matter how much healthy stuff you say, if people have this foundation that's unhealthy. So we decided to do the biggest research project that's ever been done of Christian women. And we surveyed 20,000 women for the Great Sex Rescue. We've since surveyed another 12,000 roughly, but to see what evangelical teachings around sex and marriage have done to women's marital and sexual satisfaction.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'm hanging on every word here, Sheila. But by the way, I mean, good for you. So you're not just spouting off information. You've really done your homework, literally.
That's right.
And I guess that maybe this will roll into the Great Sex Rescue. But what of 32,000 women? What are some of the things they shared with you?
Well, what we were able to identify was 4 big teachings that are quite prevalent, certainly in the evangelical church, but they're really prevalent in our society too, that significantly hurt women's ability to orgasm, women's ability to feel intimate during sex, women's marital satisfaction, even increased divorce rates. And then we found 2 big picture findings that are just scary. We were looking at the orgasm gap and the rates of sexual pain, and both of those are quite problematic in the evangelical church, and we would like to see those things change.
Well, my goodness. So, yeah, and you mentioned the word intimacy, and nothing about intimacy, nothing about, I mean, what we stand for is helping to bring about emotional safety in a relationship. And not to get off on our tangent, which is all about narcissism and emotional abuse, but when that junk is pervading a relationship, to just talk about sex. Talk about that. I mean, were any of those things discovered or uncovered in, talking about emotional safety and emotional intimacy and feeling
Yeah.
connected and just all of that stuff?
Most definitely. I think one of the big things that we found is that often sex is portrayed as a male entitlement and a female obligation.
Mm, mm.
And as soon as you turn sex into an obligation and an entitlement, you actually change it so that it is no longer making love.
Yeah.
Because sex is supposed to be this beautiful, intimate experience. It's supposed to be something that's mutual. It's supposed to be this deep knowing of each other. That's actually how the Bible talks about it. Adam
Mm.
knew his wife Eve. It's this funny, archaic way of saying it, but I think there's a point there that it's supposed to be this deep knowing, and we've turned what was supposed to be a knowing into an owing.
Can we quote you on that? Is incredible.
Yeah,
We,
yeah.
yeah, so you're probably going to get to this, but what jumps to my mind is what I've heard way too many times, way too many times, and I don't even know. You probably know which scripture, 2 Corinthians 7 something.
First Corinthians 7, 3-5.
Okay, where you are not supposed to withhold, except for the
Yeah,
purpose of prayer and
and fasting.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm prayer and fasting, and
Yeah.
if we're not praying and fasting, we should be doing it.
Mhm.
So, and he comes in throwing. I mean, it's really prevalent.
Yeah, you
So
know what that does? When we use that interpretation of that verse, what we're saying, and hear me on this, what we're saying is
yeah.
that you need two people's consent to say no,
Oh gosh.
rather than saying you need two people's consent to say yes. Like it turns
Yeah.
consent on its head. It's really scary. It's also not anything to do with what those verses are talking about.
Yeah.
Because think about it. Okay, if sex is supposed to be this deep, intimate knowing, and it's supposed to be mutually pleasurable, right? Sex is not just one-sided intercourse. And this is part of the problem, is that we've got the wrong definition of sex. If we think of sex as just penis and
Mm,
vagina, he moves around till he climaxes, then she could be lying there making a grocery list in her head. She could be
yeah.
in emotional turmoil. She could even be in physical pain, and it would still count as having sex. But let's say that she's in pain. Let's say she's in physical pain. Let's say she's in emotional pain while they're having sex. How can you say that if they don't have sex, she is being deprived? No, she's being deprived by having sex. Okay, so when
Mm.
those verses say do not deprive each other, they're saying do not deprive each other of a mutual, intimate, pleasurable experience. If it's not mutual, intimate, and pleasurable, she's already being deprived, and those verses don't even apply.
So this is radical stuff that you're saying. It's radical, and I'm curious what has your audience, how have they responded to this information? My guess is that there's a whole, like our information, when we talk about emotional abuse and powering over and dominating and dismissing all the things that we talk about, there's an audience that's very receptive and there's an audience that's very not
hmm
receptive. But
hmm
tell me, what have you found?
We have found, I think, the most common word that women use when talking about the Great Sex Rescue is validating. It's like, I finally feel heard. I feel so validated. These are things that I've thought forever, but I couldn't put words to them. And I thought there was something wrong with me. But so many men have read it too, and have really had their eyes opened to the things that their wife was going through. Um, I think a lot of people definitely at the top of the evangelical world have not liked us. We've been blackballed by, focus on the family and uh, a lot of the Christian some of the bigger organizations. But individual counselors love us, individual people love us, and a lot of individual pastors love us because it's healthy. People just want health. They want wholeness. Um, I
Why
think
why why have you been blackballed? Why I don't know if I do kind of get it, but
mhm.
I mean, are they narrow and do they say you? you're going against Scripture, Sheila
Hmm.
Gregoire, and
Yes.
yeah, like they want, so the misogynistic, you haven't used
Hmm.
that word, but I would use it. The patriarchal, look, there's a
Hmm.
way we've always done it, and we don't call it male entitlement. We call it, anyway, I don't want to get too
Yeah.
um,
I
churchy
think
political, but
I think there's three reasons, and I've got them in my head. Let's see if I can remember them all as I talk about them. But one
hmm,
is people think that I am male bashing because I'm holding men to account. And
hmm,
I told you earlier there were four big teachings that we found were harmful. And one of those teachings is the idea that all men struggle with lust. It's every man's battle. So when women believe that, their trust in their husbands go down, their orgasm rates go down, their libido tanks. It's a really toxic message. But the reaction to me saying this has been, well, you're man bashing. Whereas what I'm saying is, no, 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 no. Men don't have to lust. Men were not created to lust. Men are not natural lust monsters. The book Every Man's Battle originally told women that women are the methadone. We were created to be the methadone for our husband's lust. So God created it so that rather than him lusting after every woman in the world, he just gets to lust after you. And you are the sin management tool so that he can use your body so that he isn't drawn to other women. And I'm like, that's disgusting. And that's misandry. That's treating men like they're not capable or like they're not moral human beings. And that's not okay to treat men like that. It's also, I
hmm,
think, conflating noticing and lusting, where we've taught men that if you merely notice a pair of breasts, you've already lusted, and that's just not true. um, but so people
hmm,
often think that I'm male bashing. So that's one reason. The other reason
hmm,
that they don't like the book is that we're calling people out by name. So we looked at the evangelical bestsellers and we analyzed them. And we use a lot of quotes in our book to show this is how this stuff got taught. Kevin Lehman in sheet music tells women your period is a difficult time for your husband because he has to go 5 days without sex. And so you should be giving him sexual favors through oral sex or a hand job during your period because faithfulness is a two-person job. So you can't expect him to be faithful if you withhold during your period. So, we're calling people out by name. And so a lot of people don't like that. And then
yeah,
the last
yeah,
reason I
yeah.
think is I believe that there's a lot of men out there who honestly think women don't like sex. And so if we tell women, hey, sex isn't an obligation, it's supposed to be mutual, that women will stop having sex. And so there's a lot of fear that without this obligation message, sex will dry up. And I think what that says is
Hmm,
their wives have not been enjoying sex. Like there's a lot of misinformation and bad relationship dynamics where they don't understand women can enjoy sex just as much as men do. And when women have good sex, they tend to want sex.
wow.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you have called out some people by name, and but back to, I'm imagining there's a lot of folks that are really responding that this, you're speaking truth.
Hmm.
You're pointing out, and that's what we try to do too, is point out, like, man, there's some real problems that need to be addressed. So you've used the word mutual several times. Talk about that. Talk about mutual. What should
Hmm.
this relationship look like in regards to mutuality?
Well, I think a sexual relationship should be something where both people desire it. And that is the way it's portrayed in scripture. Even that passage in
Yeah.
1 Corinthians 7, which is weaponized against women, everything the man gets, the woman gets too. And in fact, her needs are mentioned first. So the Bible assumes that women want sex. And the Bible assumes that this is going to be a mutual thing where there is mutual desire and where there's mutual pleasure. But what we found is that in evangelical circles, at least, there's a 47-point orgasm gap. By which I mean 95% of men almost always or always reach orgasm in a given sexual encounter, where only 48% of women do.
Hmm.
So that's a lot of women who are not having pleasure during sex. And I'm not
Yeah.
talking about only reaching orgasm through intercourse. We measured, did you reach orgasm in any way during your last sexual encounter?
Hmm.
Um, so if there's that many women who are not having a very good time, then that just shows that we have some work to do. Because there is no reason that women can't reach orgasm. It's just that men tend to reach it faster and easier through intercourse. And so if we see sex through this idea that sex is only intercourse and everything else is an extra that's optional, then it's very likely that she won't. But we tend to think, well, if sex is intercourse and God wants us to have intercourse and she isn't enjoying herself, then the problem must be with her. She's just not sexual. She's just broken. As opposed to, hey, maybe we need to figure out how arousal works for her.
So, Sheila, I'm thinking about the population that we work with. What you're describing sounds so incredibly healthy and so incredibly challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want this couple. So I have such a jaundiced view, and I recognize it. And the jaundiced view is that, man, there's a lot of unhealthy people out there,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of unhealthy people. So what you're talking about is how can this couple come together and have equal power? I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you use that word. I think you would. You
Mm-hmm.
might. Equal influence, equal say, equal voice. Ah, there's a lot of couples that don't feel mutually powerful and mutually like
Mm-hmm.
we can talk about this. We can impact our emotional intimacy, our physical intimacy, our spiritual. We can do this. But I'm looking at a lot of women who would say, "Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't feel safe."
Mm-hmm.
What do you? Am I? Is my point of view too jaundiced?
No, not at all. Here's another neat stat. Let's talk about sexless marriages for a minute. So in the
Which
literature,
there are a lot of, a
yeah,
lot of.
in the literature, a
I
sexless
mean, lots and
marriage,
lots.
yeah, is usually defined as, not having sex for at least a year or less than 10 times a year. Different people define it in different ways. What we found is that there's an identical percentage of sexless marriages and something that we called sexless marriages in disguise, which is
Hmm.
sex where she doesn't feel emotionally close during sex. So she feels like at the end of sex, her most likely emotion is to feel used. And
Totally. Yep.
she isn't receiving any pleasure. So
Yeah.
technically that couple is having intercourse. They would not show up on measures of a sexless marriage. But for her, she's not getting any benefit out of sex. And in fact, not having sex would make her better off. Because when those dynamics are there, when having sex makes you feel used, when you don't feel intimate or connected to your spouse during sex, sex is not a positive experience for your relationship. And the idea that sex automatically makes you feel closer is simply untrue.
Yeah. Take it the next step for us. How how do we help these couples move from this power dynamic to mutually beneficial,
Mm-hmm.
mutually pleasurable, mutually gratifying, mutually satisfying, mutual,
Yeah.
when there's other pieces of the relationship that aren't mutual?
Yeah. And
By the
I
way,
think
I guess
you
it
need
presumes
to
that we
work
have
on
to
those
get there.
other Yeah, you need to work on those other pieces because a great sex life certainly enhances a great marriage, but it can't create one. And really, you need the strong
Hmm.
marriage foundation if sex is going to be good. So you've got to work on those other pieces too. I think I would say something different to men and women. I think to women, I would say you don't need to consent to one sided sex. You don't need to consent to being used. And sometimes things aren't going to get better until she says something. One of the interesting things we found in our focus groups over and over again is that women would be in these marriages where they don't feel heard. they don't feel seen. They don't feel like their voice matters. And they've been
Totally.
telling their husband this till they're blue in the face. But
Totally.
he doesn't hear it.
Totally.
Because as long as they're having sex, he thinks they're fine. It doesn't matter what she says. If they are still having sex, he thinks they're fine. So it's like saying I will not have my sexual relationship tell a different story about my marriage than is the truth. And so if our marriage is a mess, we need to work on that. The sex doesn't get to cover up for a messy marriage. And I'm going to draw some boundaries here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
So what does this couple do then? How do they, or what does she do? What does he do? Say some more about how
yeah.
do we bring mutuality back into a relationship that maybe doesn't have a strong foundation?
And you may need to take an intimacy fast. Not everybody needs to, but you may need to take like a sex fast to work on other aspects of intimacy. Just learning how to talk, all kinds of things like that. But for many women, they need to know that if they don't have sex, they're not going to be punished. Because if she doesn't feel like she can truly say no, she's not able to truly say yes. So you may have to take a step back and show her you are safe to say no. Because until she feels that, her libido is never going to come back. Because until she knows that sex is a genuine choice and not something which is being coerced or pressured, she is not going to feel sexy or free or anything like that. So taking sex off the table for a while and showing that, hey, we can communicate in other ways. We can feel close in other ways. I actually do care about you, and I'm not going to punish you if we don't have sex. That's a huge step. A huge step.
I have been surprised and somewhat shocked when I recommend an intimacy fast frequently. It is never received well by him.
Yeah.
Never. Like, what? Look. By the way, sometimes I recommend even a time of pulling apart, even emotionally, to just reset. Sometimes I recommend a separation, a physical separation, and rarely is it received well. But say some more about an intimacy fast to reset, and then let's talk about what other. How do we dismantle harmful teachings that are going on in the relationship? But speak some more about intimacy fast.
Okay, I'm sure you've talked about this in your podcast before, but let me take you back in time. Okay, so he's 12, 13 years old, and he starts seeing pornography. And he doesn't necessarily want to see it, but maybe a friend shows it to him, he gets sucked in because he gets turned on, and he doesn't know why he's turned on. He's a little bit disgusted with himself, so there's some shame there, but he gets sucked in. And he finds that when he masturbates, he feels great. And so now when he's bored, he'll masturbate, right? When he's feeling a little bit rejected at school, when he doesn't make the baseball team, he feels yucky and he doesn't want to feel yucky. So he'll masturbate so he doesn't feel yucky. And so all through those teenage years, what he has taught himself is whenever I feel a negative emotion, a negative feeling that I'm not comfortable with, I masturbate and I soothe myself. And so he's taught himself to soothe his emotions through sexual release rather than through actual emotional regulation. And he hasn't ever learned those things. At the same time, because he's been doing this, he's able to hide. And so, he's hiding from other people. They don't know who he really is. And then he gets married and he thinks that sex is going to make me feel connected. And so he has sex so that he can feel connected without doing the work of connection. Right? He hasn't had to he hasn't done any of the work that actually makes him feel connected, but sex makes him feel connected. And so I think what a sex fast can do is it can reset that. And maybe for the first time, he actually has to learn how to deal with some of these negative emotions. And he has to learn, okay, when I'm upset, I don't just get to use my wife's body. I have to figure out, maybe I go for a walk. Maybe I go for a jog. Maybe I take some deep breaths. Maybe whatever it might be, but I need to learn how to emotionally regulate. That's number one. And then two, he has to learn how to connect in other ways.
Read cues. Read the cues in the relationship. What is he? I want to go off on a quick tangent, Sheila. you know, I ask men, like, do you really love your wife? And there's like, well, of course I do. What are you kidding me? What do you love about her? Oh, well, she's a great cook, and um, let's see, she's a great mother. That's it. She's a great mother. Well, you can see what happens here. He starts to stumble around, and I might
Mhm.
even say, well, does she feel loved by you? Uh, no, probably not. Anyway, men don't know how to connect.
Mhm.
And I are a man, and I think I'm off on a quick tangent, but anyway, so sex is a way that men,
Mhm.
and they'll say that to me. They'll say, that's really the way I connect. Like,
Mhm.
oh man, did you just say that?
Yeah.
Well, how about, do you connect another? Well, that's the way. That is the. I'm sure you've heard that, right?
Oh,
That
yes. Yes, because
they have this.
that's what we think is that men need the physical and women need the emotional. Not true. Women can desire the physical just as much as men do, and many women desire it more than their husbands. And men need the emotional. They just may not be aware of it. And I want to say here, women are not naturally more emotionally healthy. We're just socialized in different ways. So this is something men can learn. It's not like women are superior creatures, you know? Men just haven't been taught this stuff in the same way. Let me give you one really, really simple exercise that can help with connection. Okay.
Great,
And this is something my
great.
husband and I started doing when at a time in our lives when we were working in different cities quite a bit, is we'd talk on the phone at night, and you never know what to say. It's just kind of awkward. So we made it short, which is you share the one moment in the day when you were the most in the groove. It's like, this is what I was put on earth to do. This is God working through me. I am amazing. And then you share the one moment where you felt the most defeated. Like, I just can't do this. I can't handle this. I hate this. Um, and that lets people in on two windows of your emotional space. So rather than saying, hey, what did you do today? Well, I had 3 client meetings. I grabbed some lunch at this place. I
Yeah,
saw
yeah,
Brenda,
yeah,
you say 2 emotional minutes of your life, and it really lets people in, and it also helps you to think about it, because a lot of us
yeah.
don't think about it. But if at the end of the day you got to think, when was I the most discouraged and when was I the most invigorated, that helps you identify your own emotional life as well.
I love it. That's a little bit of a variation of high low. What was the
Yeah,
high
yeah, I
point?
don't like high low, because your low might have been I was rear-ended in an intersection, right? Like, yeah, that's bad, but it's not like when you were the most defeated. It's not your emotions. It's just what happened, right?
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. So, go back to intimacy fast again. I want to make sure that we've got that covered, and because I'm going to be recommending it. So anybody, all of the folks who come to the Marriage Recovery Center, they're going to be hearing this, and
Mhm.
I already do recommend it. I recommend a fast in many ways. But what's the value of the intimacy fast? What does it do?
It cuts obligation. That's what it does, is it gets rid of the obligation dynamic. And when we measured the effect of the obligation sex message, it was the most harmful. And let me give you just one example of how harmful it is. Um, Evangelical women suffer from sexual pain, or vaginismus, which is when the muscles of the vaginal wall contract to make penetration really painful, if not impossible. We suffer from that at around 2.5 times the rate of the general population. This has been known for around 50 years. So we found a vaginismus rate of about 23%. In the general population, it's closer to 6 or 7. Like, it's a lot higher in evangelicalism. And the evangelical, or sorry,
Why?
the obligation sex
Why?
message played a large part of that. Because when women believed the obligation sex message when they got married, their chance of experiencing vaginismus increased to almost the same extent as if they had been abused. Because abuse and obligation say the same thing. He has the right to use you no matter how you feel. And women's bodies interpret that as trauma. So the obligation sex message works as trauma on women. And there's a lot of women who are suffering from complex PTSD in their marriages because this is the way sex has always been. And if you have a hope of healing from that, you need to break that cycle, which means she needs to see he is not going to fall apart. He is not going to punish me. He loves me for stuff other than sex. And until she feels that deep down, her libido's never going to grow. Her sexual responsiveness is never going to grow. She's never going to feel safe. Now, I also need to say that one of the things we found is that a lot of women internalize this message without their husbands being the one saying it to them. A lot of women, we read these terrible marriage books. Our husbands didn't read them. We did. We were the ones who were told all this stuff. So sometimes it's not even a marriage dynamic. It's the stuff that she has internalized that has made sex toxic for her because she doesn't feel like she can say no, even if he's not the one pressuring her. But you still need to take that fast anyway to break it in her mind.
And you're saying something really hopeful here. And that men, I'm speaking to men now, men, if you'll move out of the owing into the knowing, the relationship is going to flourish in every way.
Yeah, let me say 5. I'm going to give you a list of 5 things, okay? All right.
No.
Yeah.
No. Okay. All
They're
right.
good. When women frequently reach orgasm, when there's high marital satisfaction, when they feel emotionally connected to their husbands during sex, when there's no porn use in the marriage, and when there's no sexual dysfunction in the marriage, frequency takes care of itself.
One more time. I'm going to write it down, and I hope everybody's got their pens out. So, what's the label for this? 5 sexual truths.
Yeah, like the 5 ingredients to libido for women. The 5 ingredients to libido.
Oh man, I'm writing this down.
Okay,
right,
so when there is high marital satisfaction, when she frequently reaches orgasm, when she feels emotionally connected during sex, when there's no porn use in the marriage.
Slow down here. Marital satisfaction, reaching orgasm, connection during sex.
Right. When there's
That's
no
3.
porn use is 4, and no sexual dysfunction, then frequency takes care of itself. So when men have this fear that, oh, if we stop sex from being an obligation, if we tell her that she doesn't have to, she's going to stop having sex. That's simply not true. Okay? You need to give room for her libido to flourish, and it does tend to. Okay? Libido is the symptom. It's not the problem. When libido is low, it's because there's something else going on. So a low libido should cause us to be curious rather than cause us to condemn. And rather than cause us to blame her, we should say, well, why doesn't she want it? Let's figure it out.
And for our audience, the first one you said, marital satisfaction. Feeling loved and cared for and known and visible. Every woman that calls, and we get many calls every month, and they all say the same thing. I feel invisible, unknown, devalued, unheard. And so is it any wonder that the physical relationship is tanking? So marital satisfaction was number 1. Number 2, orgasm. Number 3, connection during sex. It goes without saying that there's got to be connection before and after and in and da.
Right. But there's a lot of reasons why she might not feel connected during sex, and they don't all have to do with him. It doesn't mean he's necessarily doing something wrong. It could be that she's internalized these toxic teachings about sex. So she's internalized really negative things about her body, or about her worth. It could be that she's a victim of sexual assault in the past and she has trauma that isn't dealt with. There could be a lot of things going on. It doesn't necessarily mean the marriage is a mess. And I want people to hear me on this. But let's just be curious. Let's be kind. And let's want everyone to work towards wholeness. And he could be a victim of sexual abuse too. And so maybe because of that, he's treating sex as only a physical thing and not an emotional thing, because to become vulnerable during sex is triggering to him. Like there's all kinds of different dynamics that could be going on here. And so that's where everyone's individual and we need to treat it kindly. But let's get to the root of it.
I'm sure you've been asked, this is kind of a basic kindergarten question. How can couples have safety in talking about this? This podcast is going to generate, I don't know, it could generate a firestorm. It could generate a lot of conversation. It could be, I don't know. But how can they have this conversation? It's a difficult one. Those 5 points. I want everybody watching this, I want you all to talk about these 5 ingredients and to talk about it in depth. How are we doing with marital says? How are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But other thoughts that you have, Sheila, on how can a couple who are very human, who are feeling disconnected in some ways, maybe many ways. What are your thoughts about how to have this conversation?
I would
open
say,
and honest communication.
I know it's awkward in the moment, and sometimes you can feel like I'm not safe to bring these things up. And if you're honestly not safe to bring these things up, please see a licensed counselor, because that isn't okay. But here's the thing: if this isn't working, if it is making you feel used, if it's making you feel empty, if you feel like you're missing out on passion and there's just something not there, you can choose to rock the boat or you can choose to do nothing. And do nothing may be easier in the moment, but where is doing nothing going to get you in 10 years?
Totally.
And if you want a marriage, which when you're in your 70s and 80s is going to be life-giving to you, where you're going to actually want to grow old with this person, then you want to like them. And the longer that you go without talking about really important stuff, the less you're going to feel connected, the more angry you're going to get at them because they don't know you. They don't know you because you haven't shown them what you're thinking. And so
say it again. Rock the boat.
Rock the boat.
This is something I preach. We can enable a destructive process by doing nothing, by just quick tangent, Sheila. I share that coping, adapting, and accommodating have been taught to all of us to be wonderful things.
Yeah.
And they can be horrible things. If we just cope with something, if we adapt, pretzel ourselves in some way, coping, adapting, and accommodating. And I want them to hear you right now and hear me that there's a time to not cope with things the way they are and to not adapt.
Well, yeah, because think about it. What is intimacy? Intimacy is when somebody knows you deeply and still wants to be with you. That's what deep intimacy and acceptance is. That's what we want for our marriage. And you will never feel intimate with your spouse if you are coping, adapting, and what was the other one you said?
Accommodating.
Because you're not being you. You have to be able to be you. And now you may need to change. Right? Like we all may need growth. But we need to be able to say what our fears are, what our hopes are, what our dreams are, what we're thinking. And if you can't do that in your marriage, that is something to address because you're never going to be known. You're never going to have an intimate relationship if you're hiding.
For men who want to understand this more, who are brave enough, courageous enough, come on, guys, this is, I'm squirming a little bit. I'm squirming a little bit. For men who want to know more and understand this more, but they can't, if they go to their church leaders, they're going to get more of the same. What do you say to them? What do they do? The men who listen to this and who are challenged and think, okay, I need I mean, I'm not sure what I'm even asking here, but
Mhm.
what would you say to them?
First of all, I would say I understand the reticence to go to church leaders, and at this point, I can't recommend it either because so much of what's been taught in the church is toxic. That doesn't mean every individual church is or every individual pastor is, but I've just seen so much bad stuff that I have a hard time recommending that. Um, that's really what the Great Sex Rescue was for, is to chart a path forward and help men too understand the destructive stuff your wife has heard. If you've always wondered, why does my wife not want sex? Why is she not passionate? This is going to show you why, but it's also going to show you a way out. And please pick it up. If you're wondering about it, go on Amazon, check out the reviews for the Great Sex Rescue. A ton of them were written by men. We weren't even expecting that. We were thinking we were writing a book for women, but so many men have read it, and it's been so helpful. We know so many men's groups that have gone through it, pastors that have gone through it with the guys in their church. So that's been really, really encouraging to us. That's been really encouraging.
I teach men. I'm talking to a lot of men. I talk to women too, but a lot of men, I tell them when we change, everything changes. Now, what does that mean? When we change, everything changes. Guys, if you can embrace these 5 ingredients, everything changes. So I
Mm-hmm.
love this. I love your message, and it dovetails perfectly with what we're trying to do to create emotional health and relational health, and sexuality is part of who we are. So if we can, what I'm trying to say is what any of us can do to create sexual health is going to then it's going to create emotional health too, and
Mm-hmm.
emotional health will help create sexual health. And does that all did that make sense? Is that okay?
It actually that's what researching
Is that solid?
shows us more and more is like it snowballs, right? Like as you
Yeah.
as you get healthier in one area, you're going to get
Yeah.
healthier in the other, and it's really a
Yeah, yeah,
beautiful
yeah,
process.
yeah.
And it's okay not to be all there. I think people need to hear that too. It's okay to be a work in progress as long as you're honest about it and you have humility in it.
I am of a certain age, and many of the folks who come to work with us are of a certain age, and that is something they say to themselves, like, "Man, how did I not get this?"
Mhm.
Well, we're all trying to figure it out, everybody. We're all, myself included. So
And just when you think you've got it figured out, menopause hits, and then you have to learn this all over again, right? Or you retire and now you relate to each other in a whole different way. Like that's
absolutely.
why thinking of marriage as lifelong learning as opposed to, oh, we need to get this
Oh, I
right
love
now.
that.
No. This is the adventure that you go on together. So make sure you're enjoying it. And if you're not enjoying it, do something about it.
All right, we've got to bring this to a close. I've loved this. What do you want to say in closing, Sheila? Any final thoughts?
I think when we started writing Great Sex Rescue, it was out of a sense of deep grief for
Hmm.
how many people have been hurt by really toxic messages. And as the book's been out for 3 years now, I think we're starting to experience some hope, that things are going to change because people see this isn't healthy. We don't want this. And even if we have it, we certainly don't want it for our kids. And so I would just say keep challenging the messages you're hearing. If you think something sounds off, it's okay to think that doesn't sound quite right. And ask, don't just listen and accept all the time. It's okay to ask because let's work towards health and wholeness and authenticity, not
Hmm.
towards just maintaining a status quo that isn't healthy.
Love it. All right. Thank you, Sheila, for sharing your invaluable insights with us today. Your dedication to fostering open and healthy conversations about sex is, I'm very, very impressed, by the way, very impressed. To our listeners, I urge you to delve deeper into Sheila's work and join us in advocating for healthier relationships in the Christian community. So, listeners, if any of this resonates with you, you can start by visiting our website at www.marriagerecoverycenter.com to book a free 20-minute phone consultation with one of our trained client care specialists to learn how to get started on getting help. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star review and subscribe to our channel to be notified of upcoming episodes. Until next time, This is Dr. David Hawkins signing up for Mad in Love. Thank you so much, Sheila. God bless you.
Thank you.